little aloha in our day. Spread a little aloha around the world at breakfast with Bob.
Thank you, Poncho Man. Welcome back to Breakfast with Bob, everybody. Our Not Quite Kona edition. My name is Bob Babbitt. We are brought to you by Master Spas. As fuels go longer, Hoka Let's Fly, Form Smart Swim Goggles, Zoot, the original triathlon brand, Premium Plus Sports, and of course, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. Our first 30 years, we've now raised over $159 million, sent out over 44,000 grants to challenged athletes in all 50 states, 73 countries, and more importantly, in 105 different sports. Our next guest certainly understands the importance of sport. His name is Steve Lovelace, and he joins us. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. Beautiful sunny day here in Oklahoma. Can't complain. The only thing that would make this day better would be actually on the beach at Kona with you, sipping a cup of coffee.
There you go. So, Steve, we're talking. Everything goes back to 1982. You're cutting firewood with a friend to make a little extra money.
Yep.
You returned to OU after freshman year to help with family after your grandfather passed away. And so you're basically helping to cut this tree down and take me through what happened.
So it was a freak accident. As we weren't, true loggers, we were just kind of doing our thing to make a little extra money. As we were cutting the tree, it split in half. So if you can imagine, this is the branches, and it fell over and it formed a T. It's what they call a barber chair in logging terms. And it's one of the most dangerous things that can happen because it's so unpredictable when you're trying to cut it down. So we started cutting on the part that was still connected to the ground. And then all of a sudden I'm looking up at this tree going, how bad would it be if somebody got caught between those two halves? And literally the next thing I knew, I'm pulling my head up out of the tree. My head had just been smashed from the side. And so it basically got crushed from the forehead all the way down. I still bear a scar on my forehead.
Yeah.
I broke my mandible, put a hole in the roof of my mouth, crushed my left wrist, bruised my heart. But the biggest revelation was when I reached down to feel my legs, this massive tree, the weight of it bearing down on my legs, I couldn't feel them. I was paralyzed. So rather than freak out, I worked with my friend that was there with me to help me. But it was a series of mishaps. The chainsaw got stuck as he was trying to cut me out. The truck flooded as he was running for help. And we're in the middle of Wagner County, in the middle of nowhere. It's all farmland.
Yeah.
So he has to take off running. About 3 miles he has to go to actually get help. Meanwhile, I'm stuck in this tree, labored breathing. I'm going in and out of consciousness. And it's about an hour before he returns.
Oh my God.
They finally get me cut out, but it's 2 hours before I get loaded up in an ambulance. And when we finally get to the hospital, they tell me, you're not going to walk again. You've got a bruised heart, so we don't know if you're even going to survive the night. But with only the muster a 20-year-old can gather up, I said, I'm walking out of this hospital. So I was in ICU for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Finally, they were able to do surgery. Slowly started to get a little bit of feeling back in my legs, but spent about 3.5 months in the hospital. Finally, the day of discharge came, and I managed 3 steps, it's like 3 large steps for me because I walked out of the hospital. I stayed true to my promise. Another 3.5 months in a rehab center, and by the time I'm let out, I'm barely able to cross the floor still. So most of my rehab was left up to me, but I'm a very determined individual. I'm kind of a pit bull when it comes down to it. I'm 5'7", 140 pounds, not a big guy, but I'm one of the toughest people you'll ever run into with a big heart, not in a mean way. So as my story goes, the next 3 years, I just kind of pushed myself harder and harder. Every day was a new finish line for me. I would go 10 extra steps one day and 20 the next. And I just kept adding all these small moves up. And then 1985, I think it was October, November, I'm watching ABC's Wide World of Sports.
Oh, 82 was Julie on, right?
Yeah,
Julie
82, yeah. But they replayed it.
Oh, we played it in 85. Yep.
Yeah.
3 years
And
after, probably on the anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm watching this, and I can relate to her struggle and everything she's putting in there to get to that finish line, because I've just gone through that for the last 3 years.
Yes.
And I knew nothing about triathlon. I knew I loved to swim. I was always a runner before my accident, and I loved riding bikes. So it just made the perfect sport for me to jump into. And with my ability to endure pain and just push through barriers that not many people can do, I just jumped into triathlon. I knew nothing about it. And back then, I mean, there was really maybe 2 magazines. There was no internet, so you couldn't research anything. All my training was on my own. I had foot drops, so I'm sitting here slapping my foot as I'm running because I still had partial paralysis.
Yeah.
But I managed to put my training together. I managed to toe the line at Lake Ponca Triathlon in 1986. It was June 7th, I believe it was. It had rained that night before, so the lake was freezing. We had no wetsuits back then. I'm facing a mile swim. It was my first ever open water swim, and it's a mile. It was undaunting. But I made it through the swim. I came out and I look behind me and I still see slaps of water. So I'm not last, which was a big thing for me. I jump on my $50 pawn shop bike that I with my little plastic toe clips, and I head out for a 25-mile ride. And it was the first time I'd ridden 25 miles, make it back in through transition, and now I'm facing the run. The hardest thing that I have to do is get my legs from doing circles to strides now. And my legs, I'm still very weak at this point. I'm not quite the athlete that I turned into eventually. But I push forward in the run, and at some point I have to jump off in the woods for a bio break. When I come back out, I see the sweep vehicle. I'm now last place. But I kept pushing. And as I rounded the corner and I could see the finish line, they were doing the awards ceremony. And the announcer stopped everybody. And with his bullhorn, he said, "Let's turn around and give the last athlete a round of applause." And just hearing that I was an athlete again,
yeah,
made a huge difference for me. Picked up my stride and I sprinted across the finish line, and nobody knew my story. I was afraid to tell anybody because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to compete.
You thought they might not let you race because of what you're dealing with.
Exactly. I mean, I could have been a liability back then, and this was before the ADA, so I had no legal right to be there. So I kept the story to myself, and then continued doing triathlon, eventually moved into bike racing, and I've pretty much been doing that for the rest, since then up until now.
So because with a lot of our folks, when they're missing a leg or they're in a wheelchair, it's pretty obvious to see what they're dealing with. Yeah. For yourself, if you're not missing a body part, people don't understand that this leg is compromised at 20%, that your hands might not quite work. There's a lot of stuff going on that's fairly invisible to people on the outside, but you're dealing with it. So how did you deal with that?
Well, I just being the determined individual that I was, I really didn't share a lot about my accident. I mean, people that knew me and would see the scar on my forehead may ask, but I just wasn't the kind of guy that actually sought the attention. I just went about my business. I did that race strictly for me. I had to prove to myself that I made it back and I could be whole again. But I will tell you that ever since then, I've dealt with pain on a daily basis. First, it was sciatica. And I actually carried some ibuprofen with me through the race in case I needed it, just to kind of deal with the pain. Now I deal with a rare disease called arachnoiditis. It's one of the most painful there is. But again, my life in triathlon and endurance sports has given me the ability and the opportunity to push through that pain. But I still don't make a big deal about my disability. I'm now slowly being paralyzed by this disease. So I'm eventually going to move into using a hand cycle, using a racing wheelchair, but I've got the intrepid soul of a competitor, and you're never going to shut me down. I'm always going to be pushing it out there and trying to inspire others now with my story.
So with arachnoiditis, is that a byproduct of your accident, or is it totally separate?
Well, it's one of three things. It's either the accident, which through trauma. It's through, I had a spine fluid leak back in the late 90s, and then I had bacterial meningitis around that same time as well. So any one of those three could have caused it. It's very rare. In fact, my neurologist had only seen 5 cases when he diagnosed me, and he comes in the room and he hangs his head and he shakes it and he just tells me I'm sorry. because you've got a lifetime of pain and suffering ahead of you.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but it's, for me, it is what it is, and I just kind of push through it.
So have you tried out a hand cycle or some of the racing chair and things like that yet?
I'm so afraid to give my legs up.
Yeah.
I still ride because my biggest fear is that I'll wake up one day and they won't work, and I'll face it with dignity and as much strength as I can bring up into myself. I won't be sad. It's just going to be an evolution. But right now, I still wear bilateral AFOs when I ride, and I still get so much pleasure from riding a bike. Eventually, when I do move into a hand cycle and the racing wheelchair, it'll be another level for me, and I'll look forward to it.
So was it 9 years after you entered college, you got your degree in radiology?
Yes, yes. And in fact, I got an email last week. I had sent out a short snippet about my story, and the College of Allied Health has asked me to speak during Radiological Technology Week and share my story with all the students. So it's going to be a big opportunity for me to jump on stage and hopefully inspire the young masses.
What's interesting is back in the day, when you're talking 82 and that era, there really wasn't a lot of technology when it came to prosthetics or anything like that. And so you pretty much had to hunt and peck on your own to figure out what to use. When did you find bracing and find that, oh my God, these things make a huge difference?
It wasn't until about 2014 that I found the carbon AFO. Back in 82, I had the old white plastic. It was, there was no mobility. You had a stiff ankle. You couldn't run in it. So what I ended up doing was I wore cowboy boots for a while.
Really? Wait. You'd walk in cowboy boots because they supported the ankle.
Exactly. So I did that for a few years, and then eventually I just went to tennis shoes and figured out how to run. I had to lift my leg higher so I wouldn't trip on it. It would slap hard because I just had no, anterior control over it.
Right.
And then when I found the AFOs, it was a new lease on life because now I could walk without getting exhausted. I could clip into my bike again, and I could ride, and there was so much pleasure getting back on the bike for me. I can't express enough to anybody that wants to try something. A bike is a great way to do it because you get all this terrain, you get great views, and you get a cool breeze. You know what I mean? It's
no question. Now, how many triathlons did you end up doing during that era?
Probably 12 or 13.
Wow.
Yeah, 1990, I graduated from college and I started working, and I just couldn't find the time to train for everything. I wanted to be one of the hard luck stories at Kona.
Ironman.
Yep. And so I was training towards that, but I had to make a choice in life to give back, to the people that had done so much for me, which is why I went into medicine. And I just, eventually did bike racing. It was just so much easier because I could jump on the trainer indoors in the wintertime.
Yep.
I didn't have to have a swimming or a pool membership. But, it's exercise has just always been part of my life. I'll never give it up.
Well, and one of the things we talk about all the time at CAF, people underestimate the power of sport. The mental mindset, feeling comfortable in your own skin, the social side of it. I mean, when you're out racing your bike, no one cares what you're dealing with. They just, if you get from point A to point B faster than they are, that's all that matters.
Right. Now, the two things I can still do just like everybody else, every able-bodied person, is ride a bike and swim. Right. It's just up and down. Now, running, I look like a lame duck when I run. And I'm trying to figure out how to run with hand crutches or forearm crutches so that I can continue to do all three sports myself. But right now I'm introducing people as a team. And got back from a triathlon this weekend. My great niece, Chloe, did the swim and she totally rocked it. I had a guy sub in for me because I'm going through wound care right now for an injury on my foot. Can't swim, can't ride. So I had somebody sub in for the bike, and then a high school classmate of mine did the run, and they actually won. They
very cool.
Won by 45 seconds. And when I started in school and I ended up graduating, I wanted to go into education. and I wanted to have the first high school triathlon team back in the 80s. And it
Yes.
would have been way ahead of its time, but they fulfilled my dream of putting a team together, and then they won their first time out, which was, it was so awesome.
Yeah, and it's what's fun is as our sport has gotten older, which means more and more. Like yesterday, I was racing, and there was like 7, 8 guys in the 70 and over, right, category. What we call 70 to death. And the what was fun about that is they also have a thing called aquathon,
Yes.
or I'm sorry, aquathon and aqua bike.
Yeah.
So aquathon is swim run, but aqua bike is swim bike. And you get off the bike and you're done. Swim bike done rather than swim bike run.
Right.
And it keeps us older guys and people dealing with other things who can't run much anymore. It keeps you in the sport, it keeps you racing, and it keeps you with the social group, which is wonderful. So you can kick some butt with swim bike when you take care of that, when that foot heals up.
Oh, and well, in fact, I was entered into the state championship that's coming up in July. I'm hoping that my doctor will release me and I'll be able to get some open water swims in and jump back on the bike and, build up that leg strength again. I'm still lifting weights. So I'm keeping my strength and my core there. It's just, a matter of building up my aerobic endurance again.
So when you were watching those Ironman shows and you saw Pat Griskus, and then you saw Jim McLaren, and you saw how I always talk about Ironman is the perfect example of an equal opportunity abuser. It doesn't care what you're dealing with. If you feel you can do 2.4, 112 and 26.2, bring it on. Let's see if you can do it. You must have looked at those athletes and thought, that is so cool. They're bringing notoriety to the sport and letting people know that someone like myself can do this.
Yeah, it wasn't until years later that I saw a replay of that 85 Ironman, and I noticed Pat Griskus.
Yes.
But it was kind of hard for me to deal or to compare myself because he was missing a limb and I had all mine. They just weren't functioning correctly.
Right.
And I really didn't know anything about disabled sports until the late 2010s, maybe.
Yes.
I didn't know there was Paralympics. I would have made a great Paralympic cyclist back in the day. I might not have won, but I was passionate about the sport, and you just couldn't turn me down or turn me off as far as, going out there and training. But those guys they're heroes of mine now. Pat, I think, died maybe a year later during a training incident.
He was the week before the race. He was in Kona and got hit by a cement truck. It was awful.
Horrible. Yeah. But now they have a memorial triathlon series under his name, and maybe there'll be a Lovelace triathlon series one of these days.
There you go.
I'm still passionate about the sport and trying to get people into it because it does change lives when you cross that finish line.
There's no question. And Jim McLaren, when he got injured the second time and became a quadriplegic, that's why we started CAF.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I met Jimmy at the time. I had Competitor magazine when he came over and did, after he lost his leg, he was hit by a bus, ended up losing his leg, and ran a 3:16 marathon with a walking leg. Then he came to Kona and went 10:42, which changed everything. It's top 20% of every race. Well, 8 years later, he's racing a triathlon in Orange County, California. A van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole, and becomes a quad. Already an amputee, becomes a quad. Yeah. So 3 of us got together to put on a little triathlon to try to get Jimmy a van with hand controls to give him independence. Because as you know, you lose independence when people have to pick you up and carry you around and all that type of stuff. So we ended up our goal was to raise 25, we raised 49, and we thought our job was done. We're going to get him the van. And 3 amputee women came up to us and said, it's great what you did for Jimmy, but did you know if you get injured, your health insurance covers a walking around leg or an everyday wheelchair? Nothing to do with sport is covered by insurance, which you and I both know is the silliest thing in the world. And so that's when we got our 501(c) and decided if anybody needed a piece of equipment or training or travel to stay in game of life through sport, we'd be there. So now it's 30 years later. It's been awesome. It's been really fun to see.
That's amazing. And, honestly, when you figure out you want to be an athlete or you're disabled and you want to be an athlete again, it's the most expensive thing in the world for us to get into it.
Yes.
Braces costs a lot of money. Running legs cost a lot. If you have to have a trike, it costs a lot. I mean, it's just, and you can't go buy a pair of running shoes if you need a wheelchair.
Exactly.
Right. So it's so great what you're doing. I wish I would have discovered it early on. And, I'm out there singing the praises. I wear my calf shirt everywhere I go. And I'm not afraid to approach another disabled person to say, hey, have you tried athletics? Because just the endorphins alone is the best medicine ever.
Well, it keeps people off of medication. Anything
yeah.
that can help keep you off of meds is a good thing.
Right. Well, and with arachnoiditis, it's one of the most painful. I've been down the road with medications.
Yeah.
I take absolutely nothing now. It's all exercise.
Wow, that is amazing. And it with this arachnoiditis, how do they have any idea? Anybody doing research to try to cure this or not? It's almost like an ALS. They haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, it's I think I've looked up studies that they've done with arachnoiditis, and maybe 2 or 3 have been done. It's kind of we need a face for the disease, much like a Michael J. Fox to raise money for Parkinson's.
Right.
We just don't have it. They say that JFK had arachnoiditis. You go back historically, there's people that have the symptoms.
Right.
Would have been great people, and I'm hoping that, and I'm not, maybe not the guy, but if I am, I want to bring as much attention to the disease as possible, because we don't need to be just pill poppers.
Right.
A lot of people are in so much pain, but I've just learned to deal with it over the years. I know that it's never going to be at its worst forever. And if I can push through its worst parts, I'm going to have a better day on the other side.
So you're in the hospital, you went from 150 pounds to 90. You're 20 years old, a 20-year-old athlete, and you're 90 pounds. What's going through your head when you come out of the hospital? Because you go in as one person, you're coming out as a totally different person.
Yeah. I think the one thing that drove me was I wanted to be able to get behind the wheel of my car again. Yeah. And go cruising. Cruising was a big thing back then. We had a street called Peoria in Tulsa, and every Friday you would go, and every Saturday you would go and just slow roll up and down and see all your friends in the muscle cars. I had a 1970 Camaro.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I wish I had that again. But that was the one thing that I wanted to do. But still, I didn't have the leg strength to even push the brake or the gas pedal. So I had to build up to that. And I did that with ankle weights, and I had a bench press that I had before my accident. I had my family moving into the house that I was staying at. And I just started working with dumbbells and my curl bar and bench press. And I mean, if you don't set new goals, one day, the next further, you're never going to get anywhere. But if you put all those small moves together, great things can happen eventually.
Yeah, and it's funny how you can look at things 2 different ways. You come across that finish line with the sweep vehicle behind you. You can be like, oh my God, I'm dead last. Or it can be, I got a bike at a pawn shop. I'd never done an open water swim before, and had no idea if I could even go and do a 10K. And you did all that. So it was almost like that sweep vehicle was celebrating, hey, let's bring this guy in. Here he comes.
Well, I mean, that's why I call myself the last place winner. And I think that some of the best stories are the people that cross the finish line at the very last.
Oh, yeah.
Because those are the lives that have changed, will change the most, I think, because they endured all that. And to come in last I think it's a badge of honor, to be honest with you.
You know, it's funny, back in the day when they started the Danskin Women's Triathlon Series, this woman, Sally Edwards, who knew what that stigma was to finish last, she finished last in every race. So she would run in with the last person. So nobody else except her was the last place person.
Yeah, I would like to be able to go to as many races as possible and wait for that last person to cross and have an award for them and do an interview with them, because I know that every person has a story. And it can always be inspiring. You don't have to be a challenged athlete to have a great story. You just have to, make the effort.
I love it. Well, Steve, it's great to have you part of the CAF family. I love what you're doing, and appreciate you connecting with us, because it's going to be great to see where your journey goes.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it. This is an honor, huge honor for me. I'm a big fan. Definitely love what you're doing. All your athletes that you're inspiring are inspiring me, and I hope to inspire others with my story as well.
I love it. Steve Lovelace has been our guest, everybody. Again, Breakfast with Bob, our Not Quite Kona edition. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Bob.